Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're going to talk about Cloudflare R2, which is a global object storage service provided by Cloudflare, which is very similar to AWS S3 and also similar to DigitalOcean Spaces. Actually, I made a video on DigitalOcean Spaces a couple of weeks back. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. If you're interested, you can take a look. So in this video, we're gonna take a look at how do you set up a object storage bucket in the Cloudflare R2 dashboard. So we'll take a look at creating the bucket, then all the settings that are available, and then also we'll go over the metrics, and there is a really cool data migration tool that Cloudflare gives you, with which you can actually transfer data from an existing S3 bucket to your Cloudflare R2 bucket. And then the next section will actually code a Node.js application that will upload a file to Cloudflare R2. And will expose it as an API endpoint. So the end user will use the API to upload a file to Node.js, and the Node.js will in turn upload it to Cloudflare R2, which is probably not the best way of doing it, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll do that. And then maybe in the part 2, we'll actually do some optimization and see how we can actually offload it to the user rather than the Node.js server getting involved in all of this operation. And in the last part, we'll actually try to compare Cloudflare R2 with AWS S3 and then also DigitalOcean Spaces. And then we'll take a look at which of these services will be suitable for what kind of use cases. And there is also really interesting pricing that comes with Cloudflare R2, and that is it has 0 egress fees, which means that if you're actually serving assets from this Cloudflare R2 bucket to anywhere on the internet, you actually incur zero network fees, which is actually kind of crazy. So we'll take a look at how does that compare with other services, and then we'll close off the video there. So yeah, let's just get started. So now with the intro out of the way, actually let's first try to create a bucket in Cloudflare R2. So once you sign up on Cloudflare, you can visit the Cloudflare dashboard, and this is probably where you'll end up. And in the left hand sidebar, you'll see R2 object storage, and underneath there is a tab called overview. Once you click on it, you'll land up here, and here you would have an option to create a bucket. There will be an account ID associated with this as well. And then as you can see, I have already a bucket here called YouTube test, but let's just try to create a new bucket. So for that, I'm going to click on create bucket, and then I'm going to name the bucket. So let's just say YouTube tutorial. Yeah. So two things that you would observe here is one is location, and the other thing is the default storage class. So location is basically where your bucket will be placed. So it will automatically pick up the region based on where I am logged in from. So I think it picks up the IP address, and then based on that, it actually picks up Asia Pacific. You can also provide a location hint, and then you can say, hey, I want it to be in this specific region. But I would recommend it to be closer to where your traffic comes from. But sometimes what is required is that due to some jurisdiction, right? Maybe there is some law which requires the user's files to be stored inside of a specific location, right? So here you could actually choose the European Union, right? So this is good if you want to comply with like the GDPR and all of those compliances, right? So this actually makes sure that all the data is stored inside of a data center which is in the European Union, rather than it spilling over to other regions. So yeah, this is a pretty cool option that Cloudflare R2 provides. And the second thing is again something interesting. So the storage class, right? So there is a standard storage class, and there is an infrequent access. So I think this is still in beta, so I am not sure how reliable this is, but the standard is basically you would put objects that you would use that you would access more than a couple of times a month in the standard storage, And then something that, would access rarely, right? They would probably keep that in infrequent access, right? So I think you cannot actually move something from infrequent access to standard. So be wise on what you're putting in infrequent access. And so, but for now, we're gonna stick with standard, and then let's just say create bucket, and we'll wait for it to do its thing, and done. So we have a new bucket called YouTube tutorial. It says a bunch of things here, right? So for example, it says that, hey, public URL. So we are not making the bucket public, meaning nobody on the internet can actually access the objects inside of this bucket, right? So it says not allowed. There are no domain names. So you can actually attach a custom domain name to a S3 bucket. And that opens up a cool use case where you can actually host a website in your S3 bucket, and you don't need to actually host it somewhere. So yeah, if there is any React application or any Vue application, you can just bundle that, put it in the S3 bucket, attach a custom domain to it, and you're pretty much done. Then here in the objects tab, anything that you upload here will pop up here. You can look at metrics. So like, average storage, data retrieved, class A, class B operations. We'll talk about class A, class B operations when we get to coding the Node.js application. And in settings is where there is a bunch of things, right? The bucket name, the location, this one we'll use later, which is the S3 API URL. So the R2 Cloudflare object storage is fairly compatible with the S3 API. So even if you're using something as like AWS S3, you wouldn't have to change a lot in your application code, and you can actually move to your R2 Cloudflare storage pretty smoothly, right? So we'll take this. So we'll actually use the S3, this endpoint for uploading files, and we'll feed this endpoint to the S3 client later in the later part of the video, right? Yeah, again, the standard class, public access, you can add custom domains. There is already an R2 dev subdomain that Cloudflare gives you. So you can just say allow access, and then whatever you host will be actually available on this subdomain, right? R2.dev subdomain. There is a CORS policy. So this is basically if you're trying to access the assets inside of this bucket from a web application, right? From the browser. So maybe, there are some static assets like images or videos or maybe GIFs, right? That you would want to access in your website, right? But the website is hosted on something like, www.example.xyz, right? So to allow that particular website to access resources, you would have to enable it in the CORS policy, right? So here you can add a CORS policy, and then you can say, hey, this particular domain is allowed, and then what are the allowed methods, right? So you can do that here. And yeah, there is object lifecycle rules, and then there are event notifications. There is a bunch of things that we'll probably get into later. But yeah, one interesting thing that I just wanted to show is actually a thing called data migration. So say you have a bunch of things that are hosted in your AWS S3 bucket, right? And you want to transfer all of that data to R2. Doing that manually is definitely not the best way of doing it. You'll maybe write some shell script, or maybe let some Node.js code where you would download and then upload, which is again not very ideal, right? So what Cloudflare allows is that you can actually click on this migrate files thing, and then you can actually put in your source. So you can say, hey, this is the Amazon S3 bucket. You can put in the bucket name. Files from this bucket will be migrated to R2. And then you can put in the AWS access key ID, the secret key, if you want to define some rules, and then you can just hit next, and data migration will happen. So now we are back on this overview page, and you can see that the bucket that we created has been listed here, YouTube tutorial. And one thing that you would need to actually make an API call from your Node.js application is a Cloudflare API key, right? So to do that, there is a link here called Manage R2 API tokens. So you can click on this. And then as you can see, I've already created one token here. So you'll just click on create API token. You can name it something. So I'll just name it YT. And then you can say what permissions does this token have, right? So we'll just say object read and write because we want to put objects and read from this bucket. You can actually specify a token for a specific bucket, right? So I'm just going to say for YouTube tutorial, I want this token to be valid. You can you can actually say that, for how many hours or how many weeks or how many days does this token stay valid. I think keeping it forever is probably not the most secure way of doing it. Maybe you should probably rotate it every 30 days or maybe a week or so, depending upon the use case. And then you can also say that, you can include and exclude. So you can just say, hey, IP addresses in this range are only allowed to access this bucket, right? Or using that API token. So you can do that as well. So we don't want this for this particular use case. So we'll just hit on create API token. So once the API token is created, you'll land up here. So you can see a token value here. There are also S3 client credentials that would use the access key ID, the secret access key. So we'll use this to configure the S3 client. And there is also an API endpoint that will call for the S3 client. So most of these things are blurred out, so you guys won't be able to see it. But yeah, you will see specific to your account things here, right? So, and then you can just click on finish, and then I think the token should appear here. Yeah. So yeah, with this, I think we are pretty much done with the Cloudflare dashboard. So yeah, we'll now take a look at the Node.js application, and then we'll try to code it, and then we'll try to upload a file by hitting the API and then upload it to the bucket that we created, that is YouTube tutorial bucket. So now that we have set up the Cloudflare R2 bucket, now let's just look at a Node.js application that takes a file that is uploaded from a client in the front end, uploads it locally in the local file system, and then pushes it to the R2 bucket. So here we are using Multer, which is a Node.js, which is an NPM package that helps with multi-part uploads. So here in the index.js, we do some straightforward boilerplate stuff. So requiring files and creating an express application. And then we configure Multer. So we say destination. So this is basically what should be the destination where you would want to upload files. So there's a folder in my folder structure called uploads. And this is where all the files that the user uploads by calling the API get uploaded in the Node.js application. And then there is also file name. So if you want some custom file name, then you can also use it here. So what it does is it takes the original file name and prepends the timestamp before it, right? So as you can see, there are files here, right? There is a timestamp followed by an hyphen followed by the actual file name. So this is basically setting up and configuring Multer, and then we create an endpoint, a post endpoint called upload with a middleware which uses Multer for handling the multi-part upload request. And then once the upload is successful, we actually upload that file to R2, right? And then we send back a response saying that, hey, file uploaded and processed successfully. And then we start the port on 3000, right? Pretty standard basic stuff. So if you want to take a look at the package.json, nothing major. We just use the AWS SDK .env for loading environment variables, Express for setting up the Express server, and then Multer for multi-part file uploads, right? What is really interesting is the upload service. It's pretty slim right now, but yeah, I think in the next part we'll take a look at a few other things like pre-signed URLs, where this might actually get a bit more fat. So here in the upload service, what we do is we first require a bunch of things. So we require the AWS SDK, which will use for uploading files to R2, and then we'll also use .env to load environment variables. So here we first configure the S3 client. So we'll actually create a new instance of aws.s3 S3 class, and then we'll pass it the endpoint. This is the endpoint that we discussed in the previous section. the access key and the secret key. So these were the two things that popped up when we created the API key. So make a note of these and pass them in here. So this module defines a function called upload to R2, which takes in a file path and a file name. So with the file path, we actually read the file content and then we look at the size. If the size of the file is greater than 50 MB, then we actually stream the file to the R2 Cloudflare bucket rather than pushing it in one go. And then we'll use the upload function from the S3 SDK to read from the stream and then push it to the R2 bucket, right? And if the file size is less than 50 MB, then we'll actually push that in one shot, right? The only difference here is that we use the put object here if the file size is less than 50. Otherwise we use the upload, right? And as you can see in the body, it actually says that fs.create read stream from the file path. And here it just says, hey, read the contents of the file and push it in the body in one shot, right? So yeah, pretty simple code. And then we'll try to run this. So now let's just first start the server. So let's just try to upload a file called step1.png. We'll hit the upload endpoint and we are running our server on port 3000. So we'll just click on send and voila. So it just says file uploaded and processed successfully. So now that the file has been uploaded successfully, let's check on the contents of the bucket that we created in R2. So you can see here there is a folder called YouTube tutorial created, and inside of this folder there is a file that we have uploaded, right? So yeah, and then talking about operations, so there is a class A operation type and class B operation types in Cloudflare R2, which are very important for us to understand because the pricing also revolves around these two operations. So class A operations, as you can see here, are a bit more expensive, and these are mostly related to uploading, deleting, modifying a file. And then class B operations are mostly related to reading content from a bucket, right? So I'll probably put a list of all the operations that are included in A and B. This is not the best kind of implementation that we can have because one of the problems with this kind of implementation is that whenever a user has to upload like a huge file, it has to first go to the Node.js application, and the Node.js application will upload it to the R2 Cloudflare, right? So we can do better on this. We can actually create a pre-signed URL and then send it to the client, and then the client uploads directly it to the R2 storage rather than us doing it. And similarly, if you want to load content on the client, then you would need not go through the Node.js server because it will just add more traffic and it will need probably more resources. So we'll take a look at that in the next part. And if you want more in-depth tutorial on R2, please let me know. So now let's just move on to the final section, which is comparing R2 DO spaces and AWS S3. So now that we have looked at how do you set up a bucket in Cloudflare R2 and how do you upload a file from Node.js to Cloudflare R2, let's try to compare the services. So Cloudflare R2, DigitalOcean Spaces, and Amazon S3. So I think for us hobbyists, right, who are trying to kind of make like a side project or something like that, I think the free tier kind of matters the most, right? So Cloudflare R2 in the free tier offers 10 GB of storage, which is probably the biggest in all the three services. They offer 1 million requests of Class A operations and 10 million requests of Class B operations. So again, Class B operations are mostly related to reading content from the bucket, and Class A operations mutate the content of the bucket. So Class A operations are a bit more expensive to do. That's why the amount of requests that you can make in the free tier are quite significantly low as compared to reading. DigitalOcean Space doesn't offer a free tier. The subscription cost starts at around $5 for DigitalOcean Spaces. So with that, you get around 250 GB of storage. But it doesn't offer any free tier. With Amazon S3, you get around 5 GB of storage, 20,000 get requests, and 2,000 put, copy, post, or list requests, which is very similar to the Class A and Class B requests that we have in R2. But the amount of requests that you can make in the free tier are significantly lower as compared to Cloudflare R2. Also, one thing to note is that Cloudflare R2 is pretty much free, right? There is no time limit, or it's not a timed free tier. But Amazon S3 provides this free tier only for the first 12 months, right? After 12 months, this free tier is gonna go away, and then you will have to pay. One of the major selling points for a Cloudflare R2 is the egress cost, right? So egress is basically when you're trying to transfer data from the R2 bucket to the internet, to any part of the internet, you incur some network fee, right? That is called the egress, and the cost associated with it is called egress cost, right? With Cloudflare, it's completely free, right? So even if you transfer like 1 TB of data from your Cloudflare R2 bucket to somewhere on the internet, right? Maybe it may be on your website, it may be on your app, right? There's pretty much no fee that Cloudflare R2 puts on egress, right? Whereas DigitalOcean, you get 1 TB free, and then it is 0.01 per GB, right? And then Amazon S3, there is 100 GB of free storage, but after that there is a tiered pricing that Amazon S3 has, right, for the egress. So Cloudflare R2 is pretty much ideal for use cases where there is high amount of egress, right? So maybe you're building a video streaming site, right? So, or maybe you're hosting videos or podcasts on like Cloudflare R2, and then you're streaming it to say a million people, right? Egress cost will actually quickly add up on S3, but with Cloudflare R2, it's always going to be 0, right? Which is like a huge advantage. So DigitalOcean space is kind of in the middle, right? If you want a no nonsense setup, quick, easy, and if your infra is already hosted in DigitalOcean, then I think it would make more sense for you to also host your object storage in DigitalOcean space. Amazon S3 is something that you would use if you have like thousands of customers, and then all of that data need to be stored somewhere. Then you would probably use Amazon S3. So so this is like a small comparing of all the three services. Now let's also talk about one of the selling points of Cloudflare R2, which is the egress cost, and let's just try to compare, right? How much egress cost would rack up if you're trying to build the same service in using all of these three services. So this is a quick comparison of the egress cost. So say you have a 10 MB file size with 100 requests per day for this 10 MB file size for 30 days, right? So in a month, for all across the board, this will be $0. But when it scales to say 1,000 requests, right? So then Amazon S3, I think the cost for egress will rack up to around $18. If the same 10 MB file is requested 10,000 requests per day for 30 days, DigitalOcean will start charging you $20, and Amazon S3 will then start charging $261. So look at this jump, right, from $18 to $261 with just, so 10 times the more requests, right? This pretty much goes over 10 times of this, right? And now if there are say 100,000 requests, right, for this 10 MB file for 30 days, Cloudflare R2 is still $0. DigitalOcean spaces will quickly start also charging more money. So this will go around $290. And Amazon S3 is then become shit expensive. So it will go around $2,500 a month, right? Which is crazy. This should pretty much sell you on Cloudflare R2 if you are building an application where you know that your egress is gonna build up very quickly and it's gonna be out of your control. I think that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you guys liked the video. If you find anything useful, be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button. More videos are coming soon. Till then, see you guys, and bye bye.